So now that we're all experts in OAuth 2.0, we know that the first thing we want to do to sign the user in is create a client ID. So let's start doing that. Now, if you've created any client IDs before for any other Google services in the past, you know that the thing to do is you go to code.google.com/API/console, and you create a new project here. Call it screencast example because I'm really creative. And maybe we turn on some services like the calendar API and we'll accept terms of service. And then we go to the API access section and we create an OAuth 2 client ID. We'd add our product name, my calendar project. And we might create one for a web application where we would create a client ID, define a redirect URI, or maybe an installed application where you could set up something for an iOS device, like this. And look at that, we got a client ID, and everything is good, right? Wrong. This is not the way you would set up a client ID using the Games API. So if you've been following along with the last minute of what I've been doing, stop and erase everything you just did. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and delete this project. Yes, I want to delete. All right, so let's close this window here and start again. The reason I'm not asking you to go to that Google APIs console is that when you create a game in Game Services, you're enabling a bunch of features such as leaderboards and achievements, and those need to be set up and associated with a client ID. And so we're going to create our OAuth 2.0 client ID through the Google Play Developer Console instead. So let's look at that. To get to the Google Play Developer Console, you're going to go to play.google.com/apps/publish. When we get there, you should see a screen that maybe looks a little something like this. If you have never used the Google Play Developer Console before, you'll be prompted to create an account, which is something you are going to have to do. You do have to pay a one-time fee of $25, and that's to, I guess, keep out the spammers. And no, there's no way around it, even if you're just testing. So if that's you, go ahead and pause this video, create an account, and I'll see you back here in a couple minutes. Okay, now that we all have accounts set up on the Google Play Developer Console, the thing we're going to do is click on this Use Google Play Game Services button. This takes us to the tab here on the left with this little controller icon. And we're going to click on this button to set up Play Game Services on a new game. So because this is a brand new project, we're going to say we don't use any Google APIs in our game yet. This other tab, I already use Google APIs in my game, would be useful if, say, you had created APIs in the past on the Google APIs console that I showed you earlier. Maybe you added maps to your game or something. And this would successfully import that project and associate that client ID with whatever leaderboards and achievements you create in the future. In our case, it's much simpler. We don't have any Google APIs in our game yet. And so we're just going to create one from scratch. So the name of our game, I'm going to call Guess My Number. And we'll give it a category. I think this is really brain and puzzle. And you'll notice this fine print underneath says, hey, we're going to turn on Cloud Save, Google+, Google Play Game Services for you. All those switches on the Google APIs console, we don't need to do that. So we'll just click Continue and let it do its thing. And now we're left with our game details page. This name and description will inform how your game appears throughout our system, including on the Play Games app that is available on Android devices. So make this somewhat user-friendly. Maybe you could use your Play Store description here as well. In our case, we're just going to make something, actually, we can just leave this blank because we don't really care for testing purposes. The high-res icon, the feature graphics, again, this is what would appear throughout our system, including the Play Games destination app. So you'll want to make sure that you use a nice icon and graphic here. Again, for testing purposes, we don't need any of this. So I'm just going to click Save and leave this blank. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a linked application. This panel here is where we create our OAuth 2.0 client IDs, as well as associate them, or I guess link them, with any achievements and leaderboards that we create in the future. Because we are creating an iOS app, we're going to click this Link an iOS app button. And we've got the name of our app. We're going to say yes to iPhone and iPad here, even though our game is really only optimized for the iPhone. You really only set this to no if you didn't want users playing this particular game on a particular device. In our case, I'm happy to have users playing games on my iPad as well. So I'm going to add our bundle identifier, which would be com.google.guessmynumber. And I'm going to leave the iTunes app ID blank for now. Hit save and continue. And we're going to get a button saying, click this to authorize your app now. So I'm going to click that button. And this is branding information. You might ask yourself, hey, wait a minute, I just added branding information. What is this stuff? This is basically the name and the logo that would appear in that OAuth 2.0 dialog that pops up when the user first signs into your application. So you want to make sure it looks legitimate. You want to make sure your product name says something real. For a product logo, well, I'm going to enter in a fantastic Google logo. In your case, you probably want to add something associated with your own product or company, and our homepage URL. We'll do google.com. On this section, you'll notice your choices are very limited. It's an installed application and it's iOS. Confirm that this bundle ID is correct. It should be. And if you have an App Store ID, you can add it right here. In our case, we can leave it blank and we can hit Create Client. And look at that. We now have a client ID. So now, if you remember back to our presentation, remember how we said that Google keeps a database of client IDs and authorized redirects? Well, for our Guess My Number game, we now have a client ID, which we just got back from the Google Play Developer Console, as well as an authorized redirect, which is based on the bundle identifier that we gave to the system. So this com.google.guessmynumber:/OAuth2 callback, that is now associated with our application, and you'll see how we use that very shortly. So there we go. We now have a client ID. Keep a note of this, maybe copy and paste it into a text file somewhere, because you're going to need this. However, if you forget to and you need it again at some point, in your linked apps, listings, if you just click on this, you'll see it right here. So you can always get to your client ID if you ever need it. By the way, let's look at our other panels here. You'll see achievements. This is where we'll be able to set up achievements at some point in the future. Leaderboards, where we'll be able to set up leaderboards. And testing, which is where we can add test accounts that are allowed to access these game services before we publish. Definitely go to the testing panel if you haven't, and confirm that the account that you're planning on testing with is added here. By default, it should add the account that you're using to develop with, along with any other accounts on your team, unless they don't have a G+ account set up, in which case they won't get added. But again, you might be using a different account to test with than the one you're developing with. And if that is the case, click this Add Testers button, and you can add, for example, example@gmail.com. That's probably not a real address. We won't actually add this. But if you did add some addresses, they would be listed here as well. By the way, you might also notice that we've got some green icons next to each of our sections, and they signify different things. If an icon is a half green circle like this, that basically means that you've provided enough information to start testing the game, but not enough to have published the game. If you provide enough information to publish this particular section, it will have a green check like this. And if there's really a problem, you'll see this gray triangle icon. So we can see here that everything is set up enough for us to at least test. However, we're not allowed to publish yet, and if you click on this section, you'll see that it gives you a number of things that are missing. So we don't have an icon for game details, we don't have an iTunes app ID, and we need to provide at least 5 achievements for our game. So we're good enough for testing, not enough for publishing, but that's okay, because really testing is all we need for development purposes. So now that we've gotten our very first client ID, let's make use of it and really add that sign in button. And we're going to do that in the next lesson.
Ba 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 ba.